The mind's potential lies beyond the realm of thought.
All right. Well, welcome to the Being Now podcast. In episode 5, we'll be discussing ego death. So, in the spirit of show, Chris, um, how did you experience ego death? In your life and leading up to this point, and so on.
Well, my experience with ego death was a very slow process. First, I had to understand what it was, and then from understanding what it was, how it was affecting my life, and finding out all these little ways in how tricky and sneaky it can be. So, my first experience with learning to let go of my ego was actually at the gym. A lot of my mentors working out that were helping me achieve my goal, the first thing that they always said, every single one of them, was check your ego at the door. And the reason that why they did that was because when you come in with an ego, especially to work out, you see all these guys like lifting heavy and stuff, and your ego wants to either be on par or above. It doesn't want to be below. So you're going to get hurt if you're trying to move all of this weight that you can't move,
Oh,
right?
yeah. And yet you'll think you're doing something fun doing it too.
Yeah, exactly. So, and to me, that was almost like, it was weird to hear that because, coming into this, it was totally for my ego. Like I wanted to look good to boost my ego because I felt like
Oh,
I
right. Like that's
was,
the whole reason you're in the door, right?
yeah, I was like, okay, so
Gotcha.
this is a weird
Hell yeah.
paradigm almost. So I didn't, it was weird for me to accept. So that was like kind of my first experience with it, but it wasn't really anything. What's the word I'm looking for? Like drastic, I guess, or something like that. You know what I'm trying to say. My
Right. Like
English isn't that.
significant or
Yeah, the significance of it wasn't really important up until about this past year, and it definitely started with The Power of Now.
great book.
And oh yeah, it's an amazing book. Almost every single person that I've talked to on a spiritual journey has recommended that book. Every single one of them. I think it's just kind of funny. Anyways, so once I really learned what ego was, that's really what helped me take off, right? So coming to the realization that my ego is, first, it acts as like a defense mechanism, right? It's what keeps my emotions safe, it's what keeps my thoughts safe and keeps all of it valid. And the reason why it does that is because up until this point in my life, everything that I've done in my past has somehow worked out because I'm still alive. So it made all of those, it made everything much more valid for me. So whenever I heard something else come from somebody, and I was just like, nah, that's not working for me. Like I'm still alive. I'm still here. So this is what's been working. So let me enlighten
Yep.
you. But I didn't
Oh
have
God.
the,
I've
I didn't.
said shit like that. I've said shit like that to people. God.
So I had the realization, well, this person is also alive, thinking the same way. They might be thinking the same way I am, where, everything that they've done up until this point has also kept them alive. So I need to be open to their perspective because they're also not wrong if they're still here, right?
And that's it's acceptance. It's hard at
Yeah,
first.
right. It's accepting that you're not always right. That's like one
Well,
of the hardest things
the
to do.
other people might be right, and then you'd be wrong. Is it's a
Oh
hard
yeah,
pill to
it's even
swallow.
worse. It really is. So, learning that my ego is just like a mental construct to separate myself from others, to either feel on par with them at minimum or to feel better than them. And I had to learn how that was being so destructive in my life. for example, at work, when a coworker has a different way of doing something that gets the job done, but it might not be as what I would think is efficient or fast, I would see them not necessarily lower than me, like not as a person, but the action and behavior that they're doing isn't on par with me. So now my ego feels like I'm a better worker, and that's what it tells me. And then having that thought pop up into my head, now I'm thinking of all the ways that I'm a better worker than everyone here in the establishment, and how everyone needs to do X, Y, and Z. But in the reality of things, they are doing the best that they can. They are still getting the job done, and I'm not the fucking boss. you know?
Well,
but
it, it definitely comes into that, right? Like you start. I know from the way my life kind of played out up until a bunch of very bad decisions I made. Um, the thing that I did was I would plan out not only my moves, but all the moves that the people around me were going to make. And
yeah,
when those didn't work out the way that they were supposed to, which was clearly not my fault because I always did my part, right? It it the really like sick part about it was that I just imagined I needed to think harder, and that would get me through that. And it's it's wild for real.
yeah. I had a lot. I'm sure there's so many people out there that can relate to this. Premeditated arguments, right? Where you're just thinking about every direction that it's going to go so you can have a quick response to dismiss the other person to make your point more clear. And it
I had a
never fucking
really
works.
I had a really big problem with that leading up to our last episode to today because I had a friend, you know, basically tell me that I was I am an external processor. Like there's just things I don't, and it's crazy because I work through these ideas as they come to me, and I do spend time thinking about them. However, there's a disconnect that I just can't make until I'm in the middle of it, and in the same conversation where my friend told me that I need to sit down and plan all of those out so that I have that better response prepared. He also told me that I am Sean. Like I am the most Sean he's ever seen, right? And I know that what he meant by that is that I'm very different in that sense, and that feeds my ego too, right?
Yeah.
But at the same time, it's so hard to try to figure out which direction you should go from, and then you realize that you don't have to figure anything out at all, right? You just have to be there because that's where you are.
Yeah, most definitely. And I know I talked to you about this a little bit earlier today, just because I was having a rough day, and we talked a little bit. But one really humbling experience that I had, and being so far on the journey, or at least I'm not in the beginning stages, I'd say, anymore, right? But that also might be ego talking. I'm just kidding. It's not. But I've been on this journey for a while now, and so I can say at least I know I have some development, right? And so in practicing humility and practicing, you know, uh, non-dual consciousness, which is a fruit from ego death, you had mentioned you felt like I was a lot further on the journey than you were.
Hmm.
And me and you talk a lot, and when you told me that, it almost kind of felt good to hear, not in a way that it puts me superior to anyone, but in the way that someone's just acknowledging that I
And
might be
so
far on my journey.
I'm gonna finish the other half of that, which is without missing a beat. You said it's because I had more knots to untie than you did, and later you also said that you felt the exact same about me, which is great and amazing to me because I see that in somebody that sees it in me, and incredible how that works out, considering the fact that we met 7 days before this episode and I still haven't seen your face. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And that's going to happen, and it's going to be fun. However, whatever that is, I think it's gratitude and compassion and all of the things that you don't think would come out of ego, but they do. And that's a really powerful thing. And it's really that they came out in my life naturally anyway. But you kind of alluded to the non-dual consciousness that comes out on the other side of the spiritual ego death. And through the ego death, the compassion and the self-love and the gratitude, those three things kind of just became very clear to me as I was going through that. And so I felt I needed to point that out.
Yeah, no, thank you for doing so. I definitely would agree. Like, when on the other side of ego death is, spiritual ego death is non-dual consciousness, because ego death, like I had said earlier, is where you're separating yourself from everything. That's what the ego does. And so once your ego dies, now you have, this horizon of, everything is connected and you're a part of that. And so you experience non-dual consciousness, and when you feel everything's connected, there's love, there's compassion, and there's contentment. There's those three things that are there. And so it's definitely, that's a natural feeling for us, and it's so profound once you get to be more in tune with those feelings.
And as I went through that, and I expressed this to you before we even did the first episode, I've noticed there's a lot of spirituality groups where people will basically give ego kind of a bad rap. And there are many negative aspects of it. However, if you are on any kind of spiritual journey at all in which you experience the other side of ego, which is that uh, radical sense of unity, I think that the people that stop and say that the former was a negative thing because of how amazing the unity and the connection is, my response to that is, how do you think you got there?
Yeah. It's literally like the yin and yang, without
Hmm.
ego, the non-dual consciousness wouldn't exist, just like the non-dual consciousness wouldn't exist without, and vice versa, it's yin and yang, everything as a whole. So it's definitely, ego's important to have because it
And I
allows us to come through on the other end of the stick.
I had such a bad 4 to 5 and maybe 6 hours today, and it leading up until last night into this morning when that started to happen, I had been experiencing nothing but radiant positivity and all of this energy, and um, things were just everything was clicking, and the lights were on. And when that stopped, I kind of went back to kind of magnifying that part of it and thinking, this is, here we go, this is where it all comes crashing down. And uh, that ended up not happening, and it ended up not happening much sooner than it usually does.
Mhm.
And I just I gotta let that out, because that was very very good, a very good thing that happened to me today.
Yeah, I had a similar experience. I was at work today, and so I'm a meat cutter. So normally I'm in the back cutting meat, and sometimes I do go up to the counter, the display counter, to fill up the meat case. So today I was up there, and I was doing something, and I stepped away from the counter for a minute, but there was a customer at the counter, and I had told him, "Hey, I'll be with you in just a sec." I turned around to go put my card away, and then one of my other coworkers comes up, and she was like, "So you're just gonna walk away from the counter?" not having the context of the situation at all, and immediately I felt my ego come up. Like I, almost wanted to snap a little bit on her, kind of like, to check yourself. But I felt that, I wanted to tell her to fuck off, stop being an asshole and projecting your bad day onto me. But I didn't. I felt that egotistical thought come up and I recognized it for what it was. And I looked at her and I smiled. I walked away just because, I felt like I needed to kind of disengage, but I left it at that. And typically, what would have happened with my ego is I would have walked away and I would have thought of, funny or a good way to get back at her to make her kind of feel like dumb a little bit for not asking about the context of the situation and for making a poor assumption. Or I would have replayed, how it just made me feel. And the the um the thoughts that were going on are in my other coworkers' heads that, witnessed it too. Like I would have been worried about, now do they think I'm a bad worker and stuff? And how can I fix the situation? That's what would have happened before. But instead, like I said, when I walked away, I had empathy that was there that wouldn't have been there without ego death. I empathized with how she's probably feeling because she's probably really overwhelmed with the amount of work that she has. She might have other situations going on at home that I just don't know about. And maybe she just doesn't have the awareness for how her reaction to certain situations might be affecting other people. And that's okay. I can empathize with that. And I don't have to stay in that environment. I can create boundaries, like I said, to just walk away and disengage, but I can still empathize for her.
The whole premise of that's okay is a thing that I am always getting better at. I tend to want to put myself into things and make them something that they're not. And the whole baseline, unfiltered reality part of Taoism that started this whole thing with me with you um, is a really big part of why that's important to me, because I'm able to, you know, see things for what they are, and it comes back to you saying that's okay, whatever it is, it's okay, and I tend to be on the positive side of that, where I want to make things what I would consider better, and that's the ego part that I don't see because I consider it a good thing, and that's still ego, and it's I had a conversation with my sponsor Kendall this morning, and it's so strange how what I will do is spin something in a good way, or at least a good way for me, and think that I'm totally innocent when I go for it, and my ego ends up not letting me consider the other side, and that's a very dangerous thing. And so even though I've had that experience, I still need people in my life to bring me back to that, because apparently I will very quickly get away from it.
Yeah. Sorry, excuse me. And one thing I did want to mention too, like the experience that I had with my coworker today, it's, I would say, with where I'm at right now, I'd still say I'm at the beginning stages of uh, working on my ego, or ego death, I guess, because I feel like the end goal, and if you feel some kind of way, please share, but I feel like the kind of end goal, or at least further down the journey, is to have these thought processes happen automatically, like, where I recognized, what's going on with her and felt that empathy for her immediately. But instead, like
And I
what happened with,
and I know that it's not, in a way. It's to not do anything, right? Because there's the and this is the part that's hard for me to work through, the wu wei, the non-action, the effortless action part of it is to not try, is for it to be natural. And I know that that's how we get there, but it's hard to. The trying part is how we get there, but when we are there, it becomes effortless, and I'm that's a very difficult thing for me to conceptualize at this point.
No. But what I was saying is, I feel like that would be, eventually that's going to become a little bit, of a quicker response. But that's why I had to, disengage from the situation first, because I recognized how my ego was behaving and how it had the possibility to influence my behavior. So I had to disengage so that way I can sit with that feeling for a minute and then come into it with a more clear-headed, um, or just more awareness of what was actually happening. And that's how I came to the conclusion. But it took me, like 10, 15 minutes to really get there, instead of it being just like a automatic response kind of thing. So, um, with my ego, I do recognize it coming up a lot. Sometimes I do miss it, but for the most part, I am able to catch it. I am able to disengage and sit with the feelings and the thoughts I'm having, and be able to determine if it's ego. And typically I am, because any egotistical point isn't going to have love or compassion, or it might, it can be tricky that way. um,
Disguised.
but you'll be able to feel it, like you said. What was it? I want to say maybe it was on the topic of desires. When you're being disingenuine with yourself, you can feel it
Mhm.
in your body, you can feel it in your
Mhm.
gut. So, you just trusting your intuition to help guide you, and that's how I'm at least able to come to the conclusion.
And for me, it also comes with perspective, in that the perspective is, there was a time when I was not able to stop and come to a conclusion like that at all. And then it became an hour after the scenario, and then 30 minutes. And like you said, we're at 15 now. And I need to be able to look at that and see that that's progress, and that's enough. And ultimately, we have all of this inside of us, and we don't need to go searching for any of it. And if I am able to remind myself of those things, I'm able to slow down and return and continue on.
Yeah. Like you said, like there was grudges I've had with like ex-girlfriends and stuff that lasted like a year, or any of these circumstances where I get upset about something that hurts my ego and I'm bitter about it. It would take me like a year, it would take me months, days, however long, to until I had another conversation with that person, and I put my ego aside, and I tried to be, I guess, quote unquote, like an adult about it. And that's when I just showed compassion for them, and then they showed compassion for me, and then we worked the problem out, and then we immediately felt better. And so recognizing how that works, and I'm like, okay, so if I'm just compassionate, I'm understanding, I listen, and I empathize, normally people do that back, and you're able to come to a clear conclusion. And I say normally because that doesn't always happen. Narcissism is a thing, so some people just aren't uh blessed with empathy, I guess. But
It's strange that you, or and I as well, that thought has to come through experience. It's not something that's just naturally there, and that's very confusing, because when you come to that realization, it seems like you're coming to something profound, but you're really just shedding things off and seeing what's really there, because that's how we all are.
yeah. Another thing that I really wanted to mention too, I mentioned it a little bit earlier, but I'm gonna kind of bring it back up again, is even when it's my ego isn't directly influencing like a conversation or anything, or we're not on bad terms, for example, like there's no argument or anything, it's still very destructive. So like, remember how I said you felt like I was a lot further on my journey than you were, or really just any sort of compliment, it used to boost my ego, and I'd feel, a little bit more proud of myself, and I'd feel more confident. But what I was doing is I was feeling proud and confident of the image that I created for myself that isn't, it's an illusion. It's not real, you know? Like
Right.
that image and that thing that I created was because I used to feel really bad for myself, and I felt bad because I was comparing myself to other people. So in order to get over that, I had to boost my ego so that way I can compare myself to other people, but now be on a higher pedestal than them. So compliments actually did more damage than good because now I'm feeling more and more confident in this image that I've made to feel better about myself because I feel like I'm higher than somebody at least.
And through that same vein, we're talking about in a way duality. And when I experienced that, I'm a very analytical person, and I took that to an extreme, and I started identifying with duality, and that put me in a that gave me a lot more knots to untie. And you personally saw that the night you gave me the Tao Te Ching. The next morning, I was a mess, and
Yeah.
it, I was incredibly happy. I was a happy mess, right? It was like I had all this new stuff to work through, but at the end of working through it, if you remember, I was just exhausted. I was spent, and I know that the other side of that was the baseline, no illusion, reality, and I'm very grateful for that because um, I think it's been a long time since I've seen that in itself. And anytime I seem to think about how I want to do something, or sometimes even why, I find that that's just my ego. If I can just do it with no thought, no putting myself how I think I should do it, the way it should be done, um, all of those thoughts are me projecting myself into the people, the places, and the things. And if I just don't do that and I just do, my life runs pretty good.
Effortless action.
Hmm. It's so
Prime example.
complicated.
Yeah. um, the one thing I kind of wanted to mention was with the duality or duality that you mentioned, and this sense of separateness.
Mm.
It was what found that really helped me understand why we operate that way. Was someone explained to me, I can't remember who it was, so I wish I could accredit them for sharing this with me, but I can't, unfortunately. Um, from a very, very young age, we're taught this is mine, that's yours. If you want to play with my toys, you ask. These belong to me, this belongs to you, this is your space, this is your food. And so we grow up from a very young, pretty much, since from the time we're babies up until we have this realization of non-duality, that there's separateness, and
Hmm.
that's where the ego starts to develop at such a young age. And that's why it's so hard to come to this sort of realization that this ego, it only exists because your mind created it. It's just a fake illusion, but it feels so real because of how early it was presented to us.
It's
You
had
know
a
what I
hold
mean?
for a long time. It's been
Yeah.
doing its thing for quite a while, and it's gotten pretty good at it.
Oh yeah. It's been doing its thing for me for 23 years now. And that's a long time to figure out how to unknot all of it, you know?
And there was also something that you had said to me uh, towards the beginning of all of this, where there was a time when our subconscious, which is likely where the ego resides, um, well, I guess really it's one half of the brain, but in any case, the problem solver, right, doesn't have any real problems to solve anymore. And so now
Hmm.
that brain power kind of goes towards the ego, and now it's got more ammunition to work with. And um, I still think that in the end of all of this, it's a balance type of thing where, because there's no separation, it goes from I am this and I am not that, to simply I am. And once I was able to see that, was a shift into the moment where I've realized this is reality. And I know that there are some people out there that think like I do because I've spoken with them. And if they listen to this, I hope that they are able to understand where this is coming from,
I have a
because
question
it's,
for you.
yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, not to cut you off, but I just want to hear your response to this, and it might help anyone listening. So, when you came to the realization, the I am realization, what would be the best way you could describe that? I know that might be a hard question
I got it though. I got
because
it.
it's for me when I had the I am realization a few months ago, and I couldn't put it into words, but I can experience it, and that was just
Mhm.
my relationship with it. But I would love to hear how you
There
would explain that.
there is a concept of the seer looking into the mirror, where you can see yourself in the mirror, or you can become the mirror, but you can never see yourself as the mirror. And that is a break out of the duality part of it. And when you actually are able to see all of that at once, from a mental standpoint, everything just fades away because there's nothing left. And what you see is simply what is. And what it also, what also really helped me in that sense was just look around you, right? Uh, Look around, and what you see, just what do you see? Um, it's literally just reality. And the mental projection of, well, that's just a wall. No, it's not just a wall. That's a wall, right? There's that disconnect from that's just a wall. That space in between is where I tend to make that disconnect of uh, self and not self. And there, all there is self.
Yeah, I really like that wall analogy you just put together. I heard this was on the Taoist podcast by Dan Costas Murray, which if anyone ever wants to listen to that, I highly recommend it. It's probably been one of the most useful tools I've had into learning about Taoism. It's called the Tao Te Ching for Everyday Living. Highly recommend it. But anyways, he said a phrase today, and it just it hit me like a truck. So he said the the practitioners of Tao that he refers to, they're called sages or whatever, anyone that's practicing. So the person that's not on a journey looking at mountains, he says that's just mountains, or they're just mountains. Yeah, the intermediate teacher says they're not just mountains, and then the sage that perfected his craft or a master of it, they're just mountains again. But it's the feeling that comes with it that makes it a lot more profound. And I kind of butchered that phrase a little bit, but I'll definitely get that phrase to you because it sounds so much more profound when he said
I
it.
understand what you're saying, and it's because there's a moment in your life where you start to feel like there could be more, and eventually you see that what you thought was more is the illusion. And it's only by experiencing the illusory that the real has any validity.
That was perfectly said. I love that. Another thing that I wanted to kind of touch on was with the I am realization. After that, I've heard that there's another one following that, because with the I am realization, there's still a touch of separateness with it because
Mhm.
you're the
I don't
observer.
buy it.
You don't buy it?
Not at all. Not at all. And
Wait. So
so
just so that way I can make sure I'm on the same page with you. What's your understanding?
my understanding is that baseline, unfiltered reality is the I am, and that this supposed next part of that is just there to keep us in place.
Mhm. What's that next part? What's
I
your understanding of it? Do you have
I haven't.
yeah.
People have started to mention it, and I either just don't read what they're saying, or I just and part of that also is I'm not saying that's not something that's beyond where this is, but I am saying that. See, I'm saying those this and that. So let me rephrase. The awareness of I am and what is after I am comfortable enough with where I am at to allow that progression to happen without me looking for it, and trusting that when I progress through that, it will be exactly as it's supposed to be, and I don't need to project anything towards it.
Gotcha. Okay. Yeah, no, I like that. I respect that 100%. um it'll probably be something I might touch on the next episode
Oh,
that
I
we're going to
definitely like to
do.
talk about it because I don't know
Yeah.
anything about it. So I'd like to, yeah,
Okay,
let's
I mean,
talk about it.
I can talk about it a little bit now, I guess. So we have the I am realization, and it has that still sense of separateness as you're an observer witnessing, your surrounding, right? And like you're the observer that hears a sound when a bell clings or
Hmm.
stuff like that, right? And then uh, you
Where
have
did the
this
sound come from?
yeah, you have this next realization, which is called the anata realization or anatman or something like that. That's what it is in
Enatman.
Buddha.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it's a Buddhist teaching, to my understanding. And what comes next with that is the practice of no self. So when you have this no self realization, who's here to observe what's happening, which is a really hard concept to wrap your mind around.
And it's basically that everything is consciousness.
Yeah.
And, and logically, there's no way to argue against it. And I really do like that because show me where there's not consciousness. You just can't do it. It's the same thing as show me the past or show me the future, and that's why I have that kind of um, when it happens, it's okay approach because I know that the past happened and the future, given time, will become the present, and my approach to no self is just that.
So the kind of just where I'm at with it right now, I'm sure my perspective is going to change after I learn more. This is just where I'm at on my journey. The understanding I have of it right now with no self or Natman is everything is constantly changing. Nothing stays the same, right? Each moment is different. There's nothing permanent in this entire universe. So to say that I'm a person, I guess, you'd have to refer to what you previously known yourself to be, which the
Mhm.
past in the future doesn't exist, right? It's an illusion. And that gets kind of really complicated, but all we have right now is this present moment. And like the person I am right now is not going to be the same person in the future. When I die, I'm going to be a different person than I am now, right? And all of our cells in our, everything's
Mhm.
constantly changing. We're outgrowing our bodies literally. It's replacing itself as we go on. So there's nothing permanent, so we can't label ourselves as a self because it's in constant change each moment to moment. I don't know if
And
that
there's
makes sense
a
at all.
absolutely, yeah. There's a couple ways I kind of conceptualize all of it. for me, and those ways are, um, oh man, the way that I conceptualize those things is that, man, I lost it. There you go. That's how it
Yeah,
works.
maybe it'll come back. But yeah, that's that. What we just talked about is something that I'm working on understanding a little bit better. But I'm not like doing a bunch of research and everything. I'm kind of just I let it. I did a little bit, and then I'm kind of just letting it sit in my mind and whatever wherever my intuition takes me with that. Then if it's something I feel to be true or agree with, then I'm sure I'll feel it and I'll know it. But until then,
And
like you said, I'm not going to go on this active search for something because it takes me out
and
of the present moment.
and I say that, but I've clearly thought too much about it, because what I've come out of it, or come to about it, is that the what I was going to say just a moment ago is we are in reality. However, everything that we experience is experienced by our brain. And what that comes down to is, I'm looking at my webcam right now, and is that really there? Or is my brain and my body and my space that I'm in, you know, creating that for me? And I think that's where a lot of people get lost even further into an illusion, because I feel like that's where uh, the word manifestation comes from, and you can manifest your path type of thing, because there's a very real, if you do the things you'll get the results, that's a very real thing. But there's another side of it which people take way too far, and I am trying to be very balanced when I say this, because I don't want to hurt anyone's feelings, but that's just, for me, that's not something that works for me. And that's part of why I don't go chasing after that part of it, because if it's there, it'll be there.
Yeah, and like you said too, with non-dual consciousness, like everything's conscious, right? Everything is consciousness, and so that's where people, or this is where I've created that sense of self, was because I was so attached to my body and everything. But after my body dies, I mean, your consciousness is consciousness. It doesn't die, and it's just there. I don't know where it goes. I don't believe
Right.
in heaven or I don't believe in heaven or hell, so I don't know where it goes. But it returned to source, I guess. Not sure yet. I don't know if I'll ever be. I'm never going to be sure where it goes, but it's still alive, right? Just my body, my physical form is gone, and so the sense of self that I'm working to let go of is literally just my physical body.
And it's also funny in a way, because everything that we have been talking about for however many minutes since a particular moment in time has been about things that may never matter.
Yeah.
And I'm okay with that, because I love having these conversations, and they mean a lot to me, because I like to have them. But there is the obvious kind of, when you come back to it, this is where we are.
Yeah, no, I definitely agree with that. Like, it's fun to indulge in these kinds of
Oh
conversations
yeah.
and just
Oh
entertain
yeah.
things, right? But there's still a reality that we are in, and those are things that we're never gonna know until they happen, And it's just like trying to predict what's gonna happen in the future. I mean, we're gonna
And
fantasize about the house we're gonna have and the cars and our family and whatever, but we'll get to
but it's
that when we get to it.
it's another way to catch yourself slipping out of, baseline, because ultimately that's our ego kind of running away from us. And when it comes back to the to do one if you could do one thing well, you would want to do all things well, right? And being able to rein that back is equally as important as being able to rein back the what could become depression, right? Today could have been a lot worse. Um, that there are bad times that are not as bad as they used to be, and being able to pull that back and see that you did it a little bit better than last time, and recognizing that it's progression is no matter what side of it it's on, if it's through something that was fun or something that the experience was bad, the progression and being able to do that better slowly over time is give time and give yourself a break, because this is life and it's not perfect. We work at it all the time, every day.
Yeah. One thing just came to mind actually that I really wanted to bring up. And I was hanging out with my daughter's mom. This was maybe like a month ago, a month and a half ago. And me and my brother were talking about ego death. And I had mentioned that at that time I felt like I experienced ego death. And she looked at me and she's like, "You didn't experience ego death." And I was like, "Well, why do you say that?" And then she was like, "Well, I mean, why would you want to? Ego death, you pretty much lose your sense of identity." And she was like, a lot of people, like people go into depressions and stuff, when that happens. And then my brother mentioned, people doing psychedelics and stuff, and then they have just an ego death out of nowhere. And that can definitely be really scary. Like, doing a psychedelic or any sort of, like psilocybin, LSD, or DMT, anything, and you experience an ego death and you're not, prepared for it. I mean, if you
Mhm.
weren't ready for it, it wouldn't happen. So, they're ready for it, but going into it, just not being as prepared as you could be is definitely really scary, you know?
And
And
it can put you even further away from it, because you start seeing the reaction as the separation.
yeah, and then you get like what, disassociation and stuff like that,
Hmm.
because now and it's just it's crazy. And so I told her, though, I was like, well, I've been on like a spiritual journey for a while now, so this was very, very intentional to experience this, because all my ego has done is created suffering. It's ruined many relationships. It's ruined many of my days. That could have been really good days, but my ego was replaying thoughts in my head about how something should be, or how this person shouldn't have done this or that, or anything that didn't align with my thoughts and my feelings. My ego took offense to it. And so I was like, no, this has been like very intentional for me. And, I didn't talk to her much about it, but I did talk to my brother a lot about it. And he experienced ego death as well. And it's so amazing being able to feel your ego come up and practice humility. And do you know the definition of humility? It's pretty much taking yourself and putting yourself lower, right, instead of higher. It's the opposite of ego,
Hmm.
obviously, but it's once you can swallow that pill in your pride and get past that, and you show someone love, even if your ego is affecting you, like you're saying something nice to yourself or whatever. When you can swallow all of that and realize that it doesn't matter, there's just so much love, so much compassion, so much empathy for people. And then you get so much more of it back because of how much of it you're putting out there. And it's an amazing
That's the
feeling.
gratitude.
Yeah.
And I feel like I need to say that experiencing ego death the way that we have is not to say that we have experienced something that is amazing, or any, you know, it's something that everyone experiences, and the reason that we call it ego death is because it's been so bad for us on the other end. And seeing the other side of it is, there's a there's a thing that you had said where, making someone happy allows them to also be sad, to like.
Oh
and
yeah, and
I
that was
feel,
on like episode 1, right?
and I feel like that is what I'm speaking about now, because it's there's a rhythm to how these things work in a way, and being able to know when you're on the upswing and the downswing allows you to move in that sense. And that's why having experienced this is beneficial for me because I'm able to recognize that sooner rather than later and catch it as it goes and go with it.
Yeah, I would say definitely after my ego death, it has brought me, I almost want to say the most peace out of everything I've been practicing. But I think acceptance, I would say acceptance and surrender has, brought me the most peace. But ego death has definitely led me on that path of being able to accept and surrender certain situations, because now my ego isn't as strong as it used to be. I can accept these things and I can surrender to them. And
And
that's where the ultimate peace lies.
and there was a moment when we were getting ready to sit down and do this episode where I thought to myself, there's there's a part in this whole journey where a lot of moving parts start to happen at the same time, and this is that moment in the path for myself, and I'm sure for you, because you start to notice that you can't have one of these things without the rest of them as well. And instead of, I think that's how non-dualism works for me, because I start to see it's not this or that, it's everything as a whole together into now, and that feels
Yeah.
right for me.
Yeah, no, most definitely. It's hard to strengthen one area
Hmm.
of it all specifically, or it's hard to master one area to and then try to move on to the next, because honestly, to master an area would probably take a lifetime, you know. So
I'm
I
gonna
definitely think.
I'm
Go
gonna go
ahead.
back to a of Ron Swanson quote, which is never half-ass two things when you can whole-ass one thing. So
Yeah, yeah, and that one thing being all of it,
everything,
you
yeah,
know,
exactly,
all of it that is being
yep.
that one thing, and that one thing is a spiritual journey.
And
So,
it's wild,
yeah,
and that goes back to why we're doing this in the first place, because ultimately for me this is my life, and I want to be better.
yeah, me too. You know, why I started this podcast with you, because I
I've only known you for 5 weeks, dude.
has it only been 5 weeks?
Only this is episode 5, so 6.
Yeah, because yeah,
I
okay,
feel like I've
6.
known you my whole life.
Yeah, you're a very, very close friend to me. But yeah, I started this podcast because I just wanted to feel okay, and I've gotten a lot better at being okay,
Well,
and it's thanks to.
I'm glad that your ego gets fed by actually getting the results you put forth for yourself. So,
Huge boost to my ego. Thank you
hell
very much.
yeah.
But yeah, I appreciate you giving me the space to express myself and giving me the space to be vulnerable. And it's such a profound feeling being connected again. It's for a long time I've felt disconnected. So thank you.
Right back at you, brother.
So with that, is there anything else you'd like to add on the topic of ego death?
Um, I didn't get to catch the game, so I need to make sure I'm okay.
All right, man. So if you want to go ahead and take us out.
All right. Well, so that's going to be it for this episode. And then next week, as we've kind of alluded to, we're going to be covering non dual consciousness. So make sure to come back and experience that with us as well. Thanks, everybody.